talks about systemic responses. There is an urgent need to develop policies so that in the next few years, the emission of carbon dioxide and other highly polluting gases can be drastically reduced, for example, substituting for fossil fuels and developing sources of renewable energy. Again, this is not 350.org, this is not Sierra Club, this is Francis, coming at it from a place of faith, recognizing the interconnected ethical commitments that responding in this way calls all persons of faith to. This is what made people angry. He talks about a true ecological debt. So this is, again, something that I talked about at the beginning. It's the poor who are most impacted, the least responsible. And Francis, especially as the first pope from the Global South, names this explicitly. He says a true ecological debt exists, particularly between the Global North and the Global South, connected to commercial imbalances with effects on the environment and the disproportionate use of natural resources by certain countries over long periods of time. He goes on, the developed countries ought to help pay this debt by significantly limiting their consumption of non-renewable energy and by assisting poorer countries to support policies and programs of sustainable development. So Francis he's bringing all of this together in a global context and leaning on the principle of solidarity, that we're all called to recognize the fact that we live as one human family. We all promote and harm the common good, and so we have an obligation to address the ecological debt that he's identified, that he and a lot of other people have identified. So this is something, again, that I feel kind of my work touches on, this justice and the policy. But I think another part of the encyclical that I'm appreciating more and more as I read it is the distinct contribution of faith communities around what Francis calls ecological conversion. In more plain speak, spirituality. This is something that Francis touches on at the end of the encyclical, and I think is really kind of one of the gems of the document. So again, I apologize for blocking text, but he says, more than in ideas or concepts as such, I am interested in how such a spirituality can motivate us to a more passionate concern for the protection of our world. A commitment to this lofty ideal cannot be sustained by doctrine alone. Cannot be sustained by doctrine alone. Cannot be sustained by doctrine alone. Without a spirituality capable of inspiring us, without an interior impulse which encourages, motivates, nourishes, and gives meaning to our individual communal activity. This is him recognizing that the Catholic Church is not an NGO. The Catholic Church is animated by the work of the Holy Spirit, and this is where the faith community can make distinct contributions to the conversation by drawing on the richness, the spiritual richness of the tradition to sustain this work that we're called to. And so, as you would expect, as the first pope to take the name Francis, he draws on his predecessor from Assisi, and he says this, I think this is one of the best passages from the entire encyclical. He says, St. Francis helps us to see that an integral ecology calls for openness to categories which transcend the language of mathematics and biology and takes us to the heart of what it means to be human. Just as happens when we fall in love with someone, whenever he would gaze at the sun, the moon, and the smallest of animals, St. Francis burst into song, drawing on all other creatures into his praise. So he says, if we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. The poverty and austerity of St. Francis were no mere veneer of asceticism, but something much more radical, a refusal to turn reality into an object simply to be used and controlled. I think this is profound wisdom. This is Francis, I think, at his best. He's somebody who is deeply, deeply spiritual, and I think we tend to see kind of the flash in the pan, these corporal works of mercy or these systemic advocacy steps that he takes. But for Francis, this issue is animated and inspired and sustained by his faith, by his spirituality, by his sense of connectedness with all of creation and recognition that all of these things are connected. And so I think, as a person of faith, this is something that I take a tremendous amount of inspiration in and from. I think this is one of the most profound sections of the document, this reference to spirituality, conversion, and the model of St. Francis. So moving then to kind of the more practical realm, and I'll wrap up now with just some of the things that we do. So with the Catholic Covenant, again, we work with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. We've got 14 national Catholic organizations on our steering committee. Catholic Health Association is one of them, Catholic Relief Services, Catholic Charities USA. So we really help the institutional church in the United States implement, address, respond to Laudato Si and this recognition that we have a moral obligation to address climate change. So our central organizing tool is the St. Francis Pledge. So it's something that individuals primarily can take to pray, act, and advocate on Catholic social teaching around climate and environment. So that's something on our website I just flagged for your consideration. The other things that we've done more programmatically, so every year we put out a program around the Feast of St. Francis on October 4th, so this is something that parishes, schools, dioceses can do. We've got small group discussion guides, so this Creation at the Crossroads is one, so small group discussion guides that can be used in parishes for weeks or months to really dig into and unpack the encyclical. And then we've got several advocacy steps that people can take. Here in the United States, there are several policy pieces that are happening right now, the Clean Power Plan, the Green Climate Fund, that the U.S. bishops have advocated around, so we provide ways for individuals to do that as well. The other thing that we've got is something designed specifically for parishes, so it's work on the creation care teams, and so it's something that people can, in a community, can register for and then receive bi-weekly email resources, participate in conference calls, webinars, have access to a resource library. So we're really trying to equip parishes in particular with tools to be able to respond, unpack and respond to Laudato Si. So that's something, again, that you could consider CSC or other parishes if you're coming from somewhere else. So with that, that's, again, hopefully it wasn't drinking from a fire hose. It's huge, it's a thin document, it's a hugely important document, it's a hugely dense document. It's been hugely controversial, but it will continue to be hugely influential. So hopefully that is kind of a helpful flyby through the document, kind of the greatest hits as I see them. Somebody working on this every day. So with that, I'll open it up for questions or comments. As I said, I've been doing this for almost 7 years. I've been called everything from heretic to worse. So please don't hold back. But as I said, I basically live and breathe this document, so I'm happy to take questions or talk about parts that you found problematic, interesting, or all the above. So I will open it all to you.
I'm leading, along with other educators, 30 international high school age Catholic students on a learning trip, and the theme is going to be food sustainability. And I'd like to use inspiration from Laudato Si. What would you suggest?
That's a good question. I would suggest, the first thing I always suggest is that people visit our website, because we've got tons and tons of resources that are kind of designed to package some of these concepts in pastorally helpful ways. So I would suggest checking out our website. In terms of actual resources within the encyclical, I think Francis, if you're looking for kind of like quotes and passages and things like that, Francis talks a lot about agriculture. He talks a lot about consumption and throwaway culture. He's got these terms of phrase, throwaway culture is one of them. So kind of bringing together an ethic of temperance and responsibility within the context of food and agriculture and things like that. So there are passages, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are definitely passages in the document if you're looking for kind of quotes and passages to point to that can kind of inspire some of that. But again, there are resources that kind of practically implement that on our website if you want to check that out. Other questions?
And if you were to criticize the document, is there anything you would criticize, knowing it as well as you do? Is there anything you wanted to do more of? Is there anything missing?
Not on camera. Not until I have tenure.
You're in a safe place. This is a safe
No, I think it's, yes, there are, one of the things that the document is remarkable for and is unprecedented for is the reference to Episcopal conferences. So Francis has footnotes to virtually every national Episcopal, well, not every, but literally a dozen national Episcopal conferences in the document, US included. So I think his method of consultation is unprecedented. His method of consultation is limited by its lack of consultation with women, and specifically women religious, because these are the persons and communities who have been doing this, implementing this, living this, being arrested for this here and around the world, that I think have the experience that would have added more of a rooted understanding of these. Not that Francis doesn't have this as the first pope from the global south and his pastoral work in Argentina, but I think lifting up the voices of women would have added a lot more to the document in a way that isn't there. So I would say that would probably be my biggest critique of the document. Like I said, it's amazing. Dad. We can talk over breakfast.
Can you tell, I mean, this is it's a papal encyclical, and you would hope that it would carry a lot of force within the church itself. And maybe it's too early to be able to evaluate this, but how much of a long-standing difference do you think this will make in the church in the long run? Is this kind of a flash in the pan, and that it's really just Pope Francis himself, or is there a movement within the structure of the church that this is really going to be a sustainable effort, I guess?
So the short answer and the short-term impact is yes. And this is part of where my dissertation comes into play, because I'm bringing in social science and survey data. So the encyclical demonstrably, both within the church and with Americans more generally, has impacted climate opinions in the United States. So I think it's 17% of Americans and 34% of Catholics have surveyed pre and post encyclical and have indicated that the encyclical in particular have caused them to care more about the issue of climate change. So there is quantitative data to suggest that the encyclical has made an impact. I think more long term, I think what you're actually talking about is more the Francis effect at large, and I think this is something that in kind of the theological circles people are commenting on, that Francis is really retrieving, in a lot of ways, the ethic of Vatican II. He's unfreezing the ethic of Vatican II in a way that is kind of unleashing some of this pent-up desire to engage, to really engage some of these social issues and concerns in a complex way. So I think the long-term effect will be tied in large part to the shelf life of the Francis effect, and whether or not Francis's ethic in general is able to last. And I think, honestly, the way that happens in the Catholic Church is analogous to Supreme Court appointments by presidents in the United States. The legacy of a president is lived on primarily, or at least in one way, through nominations to appointments to the Supreme Court. And it's the same way in the Catholic Church with bishop appointments. And so the bishops that are in charge of, overseeing dioceses and parishes and sustaining movements and things like that, it'll be a question of essentially how many bishops Francis appoints during his papacy, and the effect that kind of is able to catalyze at more of a diocesan level. So
that's how it's going to sort of be institutionalized, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, and part of the work that, part of the thing with the Catholic Church is that it's, by definition, it's an institution with so many different structural ministries. So I think the encyclical will be institutionalized in Catholic colleges and universities, in Newman centers, in Catholic hospitals, in Catholic development relief agencies. All of these different ministries will take the document and implement it in a way that makes sense with the people that they serve and in the work that they do. And so I think that will be one of the ways that the document kind of has lasting effects, is through the different ministries in the church. So it'll kind of be top-down, mid-level, and then I think grassroots, bottom-up through parishes and popular movements, which is the Francis is supported. So I think it'll be top, mid, and lower tier, but I do think it'll have staying power.
Thank you.
I've always been about level and go up, and as a Catholic school teacher, or someone that works empowers the lower level people to say things that we've always thought, but we can say to our students.
Right.
Now the Pope says it's okay.
Well, yeah,
It's
and
empowerment.
the popes have always said this.
Well, exactly.
Well, that's
Now
the
we-
thing.
right,
That's, so no, you're exactly right. I mean, it's tremendously liberating to essentially be able to point to somebody who has authority, but also is seen as a rock star. And I think there's an interesting distinction that's made in social sciences between an authority and inauthority. So inauthority is hard power of the office. An authority is somebody that people recognize as somebody who is wise, who is worth listening to, who is just, those two types of powers don't always coalesce. So Dorothy Day was an authority. People recognized her as a wise person worth listening to. John Paul II was in authority. He had the hard power of the papacy. And I think with Francis, we've got the convergence of an authority, in authority. He's got the hard power of the office, and people love him. And so I think it's exciting. Ron?
Dan, somewhat related to your dad's question, from your vantage point, your work at the Bishops' Conference, how much attention do you think diocesan bishops have given to the encyclical?
That's a good question. When it originally came out, there were 109 local ordinaries put out statements in support of the encyclical. So the U.S. has about 244 dioceses. So a little less than half of the local bishops put out statements in support of it. Since then, I think, especially in an election year, this has gotten various levels of attention and play. I think it's something that bishops recognize. I think it's something that the church, not only bishops, but the church is trying to figure out what to do with, because it's something that it transcends all these boxes. It transcends the culture wars. It transcends the peace and justice crowd. It transcends the pro-life crowd, the binary that exists in the U.S. Between those two camps. It transcends all these walls. I think people are just trying to figure out what to do with it. I think bishops included. There have been a lot of bishops who have been fantastic with it. So we've engaged with Miami, Cincinnati, Des Moines. Bishops there have done press conferences. Archbishop Kurtz in Cardinal World in D.C. and Louisville had a national press conference in D.C. So I mean, there's attention being paid to it, but I think people are still trying to kind of unpack it and digest it and understand what its impacts are for the church. So I think, and again, it's one issue among many. I recognize that. I think the difference with climate change is that it's not one issue among many, because there's a closing window of opportunity within which to avoid tipping points of greenhouse gas concentrations beyond which warming becomes essentially irreversible and runaway. So this is not an issue that we have an indefinite amount of time to address. This is an issue that is literally time sensitive because it deals with the geophysical dynamics of the planet. So I do think this is an issue that has a unique level of urgency.
I work for the Missouri Coalition for the Environment, and so it's not affiliated with any religious organization, but my staff, my board, many of our members, Catholic, non-Catholic, non-Christian, non-religious, are very excited about this document. And I'm just curious if you've seen any interfaith coalitions that have sprung out of this and are working towards policy change.
Yep, absolutely. So this is something. This is actually something that we at the Covenant and by extension, I think the Bishops' Conference were surprised at the amount of secular and interfaith interest in this document. With so many people. I mean, the media coverage alone for this document was literally unprecedented. I mean, the coverage from the Times, the Post, I mean, it was unbelievable. The National, and then it was put on wire and I mean, literally run across the country. I mean, it's been unbelievable. And NGOs, environmental organizations have pointed to this as something that they can organize around. And I think part of that is that Francis is lifting up, he's an authority in authority, giving moral voice to these issues. And so this isn't just an environmental organization advocating for climate justice. This is the leader of 1.2 billion Catholics advocating for climate justice. And so they see this as an opportunity to bridge build. And I think that's aided by the fact that Francis intended the document to be that. So he timed the release for the document in part to shape the UN climate negotiations in Paris in December, so the COP21 negotiations. He explicitly said that on one of his in-flight interviews, his infamous interviews, he said he basically put it out in June so that it would have 6 months to marinate in the consciences of the negotiators and hopefully influence